The National Treasury says that 46% of the entire population in South Africa currently receives social grants. The entity SA reaches an unusually high coverage for a developing country, making the situation unsustainable. In a presentation to Parliament last week, Friday, Treasury noted that if job creation continues to be poor, sustainability of the system will be impossible, and the overall fiscal position will become under a serious strain. Now, there are already 27.8 million people in the system receiving grants. 9.4 million of those are recipients of the Social Relief of Distress grant. Meanwhile, a KPMG report on Economic Global Outlook says South Africa's short-term goal of expanding the social wage has generally dominated government's agenda. The rollout and subsequent expansion of a social grant program has led to more people receiving a social grant than are employed. KPMG economist Frank Blackmore joins us to talk about this. Frank, thanks so much for joining us. Good to have you.
Morning.
That can't be very sustainable. I mean, when you look at it and literally sum it up in that one sentence, that more people are receiving grants than are employed in the country, this is absolutely this is a case for disaster. I mean, talk to us about your views on this.
Yes, from two angles, this isn't sustainable. Firstly, you're not building the economy. And you're not creating inclusion into that economy of those who previously weren't part of the economy. So that's the one side. On the second side, we only have so much money to give away in grants. So if one extends these grants, as they have been now to, let's say, the regular grants to about a third of the population getting, or close to half the population if we include the COVID grant, you're getting such a small grant that is that really helping people in need either. So from either aspect, there is just no sustainability to this process. We can't carry on cutting the amount of money we have into smaller and smaller portions and giving people 350 rands now for the COVID grant or the basic income grant that is often talked about, and expect everyone to be better off. The only way we all get better off is if we grow the economy and we pull people who are unemployed at this point into that economy, let them contribute also to the fiscus. It allows the government to raise more money through taxes due to economic activity, and it allows them to then allocate those taxes where they see fit in order to uplift those folks that can't join the labor market over some point.
Yeah, which is, you know, this is the reality, is that if you're not working, you're in a desperate situation. And, you know, just even that, as you say, cutting it up into small portions of a 350 rand grant, you know, that is your sort of, that's your pay gap between starvation or not, because there is just no prospect of jobs. So what do we do in an environment where the economy is not creating jobs, but you need to at least allow people to have something? So how do you balance this, and where do we start? I mean, obviously we'll talk to job creation and how we do that, but as we find ourselves right now in the situation, no jobs, people are desperate, and they need these grants, how do we balance this?
I think, you know, what we've done is, again, we planned the grant system as an important stopgap measure. So, you know, at democracy, we knew there would be some people who would have been left behind. In other words, apartheid didn't allow them to either get a decent education to be able to be included in the economy at that point, or people who were too old to be included at that point. And these people would need to be looked after. So as you say, for that a grant of some sort, whether it be children, veterans, whatever it may be, disability grant is important, because it's how society looks after those folks who don't have the ability to join the economy. But where we failed was, at the same time, we weren't trying to absorb everybody else into the economy at that point. Now what happens is, 27 years later, we're stuck with a huge pool of grants, and we haven't sort of developed the institutions that can draw people into the economy as part of the economy. And that, I think, has resulted in this problem now. To get out of it is very difficult, because the people on the grants still need those grants. As you say, in order to survive, or more importantly, in international literature, grant is often there to give you that basic level of subsistence that allows you to go and look for work, or allows you to spend your time perhaps looking into starting a small business, whatever it may be. And that component will always still be important. The problem is we haven't had that growth, that emphasis on growth to absorb more people into the labor market at the same time as looking after the grants. There's nothing wrong with the grant system. In fact, some people would say the grant system is a necessary economic intervention, especially for times such as COVID, where a lot of people will lose their jobs for no fault of their own. And they need to be taken care of by that society. But as we leave the COVID sort of pandemic, whenever that may be, these people need to be drawn back into the economy and be participants in that economy.
Yeah, and that's the thing, because I mean, you mentioned it a bit earlier, and right up front, you know, the tax base is getting smaller and smaller and smaller in South Africa as well, and more of a dependence on these grants, and yet, you know, that doesn't balance out very well. But you mentioned COVID, so let's take a little bit more of an in-depth look into this global report as well. It says that while the global COVID-19 pandemic may not be over, the research does show major economies are shifting mindset and focusing increasingly on the potential risks and rewards of a more sustainable long-term recovery. Are you clear in terms of what South Africa's recovery strategy actually is?
Not at this point. I think we're just trying to get over the COVID, the number of infections. We've only vaccinated, a third of our adult population at this point. We know if we open the economy, we allow access to sectors such as tourism. Tourism is quite important for both employment and sort of jobs in the rural areas of the country, as well as low sort of skilled folks who benefit from tourism in general. So that's massively important. But where are we going? We've had some talk in the budget about sort of freeing up the energy sector. We know that recent sort of legislation to increase the IPP capacity from to 100 megawatts from 1 megawatt has been spoken about, and there are a lot of projects that the private sector, especially mining, have in that regard to add generating capacity to the system. But I think the main focal point should be on attracting investment to our economy. You know, only so much can be legislated or corrected through policy adjustments. You know, government is supposed to provide an environment for the economy to grow, and then the economy will find a way to grow. And at the moment, there's too much uncertainty, policy uncertainty. What's going to happen if I invest in my business over the next 5 years? Will I be able to get the money back, or will other changes come? And that policy uncertainty prevents both consumption expenditure, people want to hold on to their savings just in case they need it for a rainy day, and investment expenditure for the same reason. And I think if you create an environment of certainty in our business, in our economy and the way it's run, then you will free up, people will opt to obviously invest in the economy. And that investment will bring a certain degree of jobs. It won't solve everything. A lot of people say, well, trickle-down economics, where you basically allow business to thrive, will absorb automatically all the labor. Probably won't do that. But it's certainly a necessary condition to create employment in the economy, is to allow that economy to grow. The bigger it is, the more it can absorb of the labor and those people who are not now participating in the economy.
Yeah, and it is worrying, because, for the longest time, it just feels like that's all we've done is spoken about these employment opportunities and the fact that we're going to create these jobs, but there's never tangible results. And it's a big worry. And I mean, one needs to ask, if South Africa actually had a clear growth mandate with a long-term vision, what should it look like? What kind of strategies should be in place to make jobs? Because from the years of former President Thabo Mbeki to the years now of President Cyril Ramaphosa, it's always standing there and talking about these job opportunity and millions of job opportunities that are going to be created, and we're going to grow the economy, and we're going to, and yet it never happens. We can't blame it on COVID because we were here before the pandemic hit. So what needs to happen?
And I think that's part of the problem. It's not an easy problem to solve. I think something like a social wave, one can decide to pay whichever constituents a certain amount of money quite quickly in the form of a grant over time. But in order to design a labor-absorbing economy, that takes a lot longer, because you need a lot of things must be in place, and a lot of things that we know are a problem in our country. Service delivery is one. In order to have a workforce, they must be educated. So your education system must function from the first year to the last, and on top of that, tertiary. They must be healthy. So your health system must work. In order to work every day of the week, you need to have access to those health systems. They must be safe. People must feel safe. So your safety and security must work. They must be able to get to work. So your transport system needs to work. These things are not fixed overnight. These things are invested over the long term. In fact, over the period in which a government takes office. So it takes much longer than 5 years for you to educate a child from grade 1 to matric. And that means even if I do the right thing in my tenure as government, it's not going to be me who reaps the rewards of that. And I think that's the type of thinking we need to get to, this long-term sustainable growth mandate. That also allows us to incorporate other ideas, such as let's grow long-term in a more sustainable way according to the environment as well. Yeah. Let's leave coal. Let's try and divert those coal jobs into green jobs. And then at some point educate people going into the, let's call it the mining sector, the coal sector, oil and gas sector. Let's divert them into those sort of green areas, or the ocean economy. We know these things. These goals have been set up in the National Development Plan, but there just isn't sort of a tenable tract to get us from where we are now to where we want to go. Indeed. And I think we're stuck in the short-term thinking. We need to extend that to the longer period, so that we all uplifted by our sort of these policies.
Yeah. Well, I mean, your view as well is that if we look at South Africa in a global context, you look at the US, we look at China, we look at Japan, they already have positive economic outlooks driven by consumer spending, industrial production, easing of supply chain disruptions, lots of other factors as well. But, the reality is it's not really possible to have consumer spending in a country with high levels of unemployment like ours. So there again is another problem. Huge imports coming in. We're so dependent on external countries for things that it seems that our manufacturing has come also to a grinding halt in terms of many industries, and these are the losing jobs. And we seem to be supporting external as opposed to internal, and this is also a major problem.
Yeah, no, I think you're right there. There hasn't been an economy that has become sort of middle class in terms of its classification without a decent manufacturing sector. Manufacturing sector takes people who have a degree of skills and allows them to have decent jobs over a sustained period of time. I don't think we've ever had that mandate. It's sort of following what happened in the East Asian Tigers, where they were export-orientated, labor-intensive industries were highlighted. In other words, they worked a lot with manufacturing goods that required a lot of labor, and they exported a lot of those goods. Now, recently, we've obviously had a windfall with respect to commodities, and so that situation has looked good. And of course, we're an oil importer, and that has never been good for our sort of trade balance, given the prices of oil and the amounts of oil that we need. but we need to produce something that we can sell overseas that has some other advantage in our economy.
Yeah.
And then services as well. They require a higher level of skill, but one could offer certain services, and I think we are here, call center type services, etc. We're well located globally around the GMT. And we speak English, so we do have those type of services, but I think a lot more can be done in that respect.
Yeah. What about? I mean, what can we stand out for? You know, you'd think that we could stand out for something. I mean, let's just take, Sakina was reminding me as well of Escor. I mean, a great company doing exceptionally well, sold off, and now we pay top dollar to get metals back into the country. Now, you know, this doesn't make sense. We have it here, but we sell it out. And this is where, you know, instead of actually capitalizing on what we have, it just seems that, you know, this is just, we're running things wrong.
Yeah, I think so. I think part of the problem has been our energy issue. I think, the use of the minerals we dig up and sort of value added to those before we export them has always been on the cards. The problem is that in 2006 we ran into energy shortages and we still haven't solved that problem. And that's why I think, a lot more has to be done, especially focused on the basics. And the basics being, manufacturing needs energy to supply. They need transport systems to work, including port and rail. We need those things to get those things working again. The private sector will notice it's working and they will come up with ideas. Remember, the private sector is where a lot of innovation takes place. We're a very innovative country. If we look in our past, there are lots of things that South Africa has excelled at or sort of punched above its weight on. And that will happen once more. But we need the basics to work. And I think the focus from a policy standpoint should be, let's get the basics right. Let's fix that transport system. Let's give people a proper education. Let's attract investment into this economy. Investment and innovation can do a lot for accelerating the problems that we've spoken about this morning.
Yeah, I just want to quickly wrap it up. I mean, I touched a little bit on that shrinking tax base, which I know your article does also focus on quite some when you look at it. It's very much at the center of things, since all these monies are expected to come from this very shrinking tax base. So there are two problems: shrinking tax base, carrying 46% of the population that relies on a social grant, and this doesn't bode well for growth in an economy, and we obviously have to find urgent solutions to try and find this. So, instead of expanding the social grant system, it's finding opportunities for employment. So again, I suppose what I need to ask you is, what does the world perceive South Africa to look like? Are they keen on investing in South Africa, or is it a country where at the moment they're actually pulling away from and saying we need them to sort out their own house before we start going in there?
Well, I think the worldview on South Africa has always been pretty good in a way. I think the feeling I get from my international colleagues, etc., is that, given the democratization miracle we've gone through, people want us to succeed. And often they can't understand why sometimes we make the economic choices that we have made that's led us down this path. So I think there are lots of people willing to invest. I still think we have one of the largest endowments, if not the most valuable endowment of minerals resources still waiting to be harvested or mined in our economy. We're growing. We can grow a lot of sectors in this economy, including green economy, hydrogen economy. We're quite good at this automotive manufacturing area. Agriculture has always been pretty good here. The services industry, we're pretty innovative there. So I think there's a lot of scope still for people. What I tell a lot of people when I speak to them is that South Africa still has a good CV. We're quite prominent in the sort of G10 countries. We've been integrated there. We have good institutions, a great financial system, good oversight system. You can still have 100% ownership within the country. we're a gateway into other parts of Africa.
Yeah.
There are a lot of things in our favor. We need to leverage those and get this economy growing over time.
All right. Got to leave it there. Very quickly have to say goodbye. Thanks for talking to us. So just giving us a bit of an overview there of the economy. Frank Blackmore from KPMG talking about a global report. 28 million South Africans, 46% of the population receiving social grants. And of course, as you heard, this is unsustainable. We say goodbye for SABC 2 viewers.